Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a race against time as I walk home from the train and the clouds overhead loom dark and gray. It has rained off and on a little bit in the last few hours. The question is, will it rain on me while I'm walking home? And equally important, is the wind strong enough to yank the glasses off my face? Because it feels like it might be. The very first pair of glasses I owned, I lost because the wind yanked them off my face. And I'm a little worried that'll happen again. In fact, I might take off my glasses and put them in my pocket for this walk, just to avoid the glasses yanking that I think might occur with the wind at its current pace. Of course, then I can't read my notes, so it's a whole deal. Nonetheless. All right. So, dear listener, I was thinking about what I might talk about today, and I realized I hadn't really done a Message from the Deep episode for a while, but a Message from the Deep episode demands a game that I've played a lot. And I feel like most of the games I've played a lot, I've done Message from the Deep episodes about. I was looking, and sure enough, yeah, most of the games I've played a lot, I have done a Message from the Deep episode about. But there was a game I played a couple weeks ago, which I realized I don't remember I don't know if I've ever talked about it on the podcast, maybe in rare mention, like in reference to something, but I certainly haven't talked about it in depth. It was a game I played long before I started doing the podcast, so I never reviewed it. And that is Lords of Waterdeep. Now, this is a game I've logged 14 plays, which certainly puts it in the category of being eligible for a Message from the Deep. I generally will require at least 10 plays or so in order to do a Message from the Deep episode about a game. Maybe not always, but often. And so at 14, this is pretty good. I can also say none of these have been digital. They're all in-person plays. They're spread out over years. So I've had time to get used to this game, to accumulate. I didn't even have a copy for a while. I was just playing other people's, but I found a good used copy. And it's the sort of game that just actually, no, I didn't find a good used copy. There was a good deal on it on Amazon. And I was like, this is a game I should have. And it's fun every time. Lords of Waterdeep is a great time and a game that I'm happy to have. So with that in mind, why don't we talk about Lords of Waterdeep a little bit? Now, if you haven't heard a Message from the Deep episode, no shade, I haven't done very many of them recently. But the idea of Message from the Deep is that I am talking about a game I've played a lot and talking about it in depth, right? It's a deep episode, deep discussion of the game. But I've found that just doing that as a review, that's not fun. So sometimes I will do these as duels, where I'll take two games that I know very well, and I'll compare them to one another, and I'll say which game is better. Or on these 5 metrics, which game is better. You can look up duel episodes. I've done a couple of those. That's D-U-E-L, not D-U-A-L. Although, interestingly, because it's about 2 games, it could be a D-U-A-L episode as well. Interesting. But I didn't want to do that, in part because all the games I could think of that I thought should duel with Lords of Waterdeep, in fact, I had already talked about in the context of other games. So I don't know that I want to do another duel of games that are similar to the ones I've already talked about. So what I decided to do instead is pick out 4 qualities of Lords of Waterdeep and talk about how they work in the game, and 2 other games, give or take, that have those same qualities or do that same thing. So that if you play these other games, they'll give you a feel. But to start with, what is Lords of Waterdeep? Lords of Waterdeep is an entry-level worker placement game themed around Dungeons and Dragons. It's set in the Forgotten Realms setting in the town of Waterdeep, which is a huge city. The idea is you are one of several sort of villainous, or Machiavellian anyway, lords governing over the city. In D&D terms, you're the person who visits the pub and gives other people missions to do, rather than doing them yourself. The game is played over a series of 7 rounds. I believe it's 7, could be 8. And each round you have worker placement. You have agents, workers that you put out onto the board, and those allow you to collect resources. The resources are white, orange, purple, and black cubes, and those are rogues, wizards, clerics, and fighters. And then you use those heroes to complete missions, and the missions score you points. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's probably as much as you need to know right now. One of the big salient features is there's a building market And so each round, somebody can go to the building market, pay a little money, and add a building to the board. The building is another worker placement spot where players can go. The person who owns the building gets a little spiff, a little bonus when the players go there, but usually the spaces are better than the spaces otherwise on the board. So there are also intrigue cards that allow you to mess with other players. That's kind of those are the broad sweeping elements of the game. It was released in 2012, designed by Peter Lee and Rodney Thompson. And I would say the general reaction I think most people have to it when they play it is that it looks like a cheesy D&D branded game, and it's far better than it has any right to be, is maybe the way I've heard it framed. There is an expansion called The Scoundrels of Skullport. I have played that. I do like it a lot, but I don't own that one. I should keep an eye out for some time when it's cheap on Amazon and pick it up, because it does add a nice element to the game and makes it worth playing. So I want to talk about 4 things about the game that I really like and some other games that do similar things so that we can compare them. I will say in almost every case, the other games that do similar things came after Lords of Waterdeep. So Lords of Waterdeep is a classic, and these other games, I can't say they were borrowing from it, because I don't know that there's very much in Lords of Waterdeep that wasn't in games before it, but it brought them together in a nice package. So to start with, limited workers. Now you've played a lot of worker placement games if you've played Agricola, or you've played like the classics like Agricola or Zolk in the Mayan calendar. These are interesting, fun games that involve placing workers, but they also involve getting more workers. A key strategy of the game is to recruit more workers to be able to play more workers throughout the game. Lords of Waterdeep does not do that. Instead, what happens is you get 2 workers, and you have the 2 workers for the first half of the game, and then in round 5, everybody gets a 3rd worker. You get the 3rd worker for the rest of the game, and that's it. The only other way you can get an extra worker, there is a building that lets somebody have an extra worker on the next round, and there is one mission that you can accomplish that will allow you to have an extra worker for the rest of the game. So if you get that mission, you could have 1 more worker, but generally the game does not allow you to get a whole bunch of extras. The nice thing is about this is it keeps the game really tight, it keeps it moving. The game doesn't bloat as you go along. I mean, Agricola, the later rounds can get really hefty if everybody has 4 or 5 workers. The rounds take just forever. Lords of Waterdeep stays pretty tight because of that limitation. The 2 games that it reminds me of, Lost Ruins of Arnak. You only have your 2 workers. I think there might be a way to get a 3rd, but I don't think so. Or do you get 3? Maybe you get 3, but you only have 3 for the whole game, or you just don't have that many workers. So in Lost Ruins of Arnak, you only have the 2 workers. Those are the workers you get for the whole game. The rest of the game comes through efficiency of doing other kinds of actions in order to amplify your turns. Everdell feels the same way, although in Everdell, you're actually gaining workers such that by the end of the game you have, I think, 5. So you do get more as the game goes along, but the early stretch of the game in Everdell feels really tight the way that Lords of Waterdeep does. And both Lost Ruins of Arnak and Everdell have this element where they amplify the number of actions you get based on your successful use of the game's mechanisms. And it's that second part that's not in Lords of Waterdeep. In Lords of Waterdeep, you get 2 actions, or sometimes you get a 3rd action if you play one of your workers to the harbor, because the harbor allows you to play a card. So you go to the harbor, you play a card, and then at the end of the round, after everyone else has placed all their workers, everybody at the harbor gets to move their worker to another location. So you do get a 3rd action if you do that. And then those rare ways that you could get 1 more worker. So Lords of Waterdeep maintains it pretty tight, but that tight feeling of limited actions, especially early in the game in Lost Ruins or early in the game in Everdell, feels similar. So the second aspect I want to talk about is contract fulfillment. As I said, in Lords of Waterdeep, the main way that you get points is you accumulate these different resources in the form of these different warrior figures, and then you spend those resources in order to fulfill contracts. And the contracts are, in the game, things that you might want people to do. So some of them are themed good, some of them are themed bad. The idea is they are things that you, as a Lord of Waterdeep, might want people to do. So you might want them to break people out of the prison, or you might want them to raid a cave and kill a dragon, or whatever, right? And so you use these different workers in order to accomplish these missions, and you get points for the missions. That's the main way you get points. Now, this is something that pops up in a number of other games. The 2 in particular that I was thinking of that feel very similar, Via Nebula, the Martin Wallace game, that's sort of like train game light without trains, has contract fulfillment that I think fits the genre pretty well. You have these cards that you get and you have to fulfill them. It's kind of a race to see how many you can get filled by the end of the game. In Via Nebula, the number you fill triggers the end of the game, whereas in these other games, in Lords of Waterdeep, there's a set number of rounds. The other one I was thinking of was Obsession. And arguably Obsession's not a contract fulfillment game, but one way to look at Obsession is you have these workers and you have guests, and in order to do anything, you take one of your tiles that has a set of requirements on it, and you have to meet all those requirements, and then you get points based on what you spent. Then it cycles and you can do it again, but really the best way to do it is to go buy another tile and then activate that tile. If you keep activating the tiles you already have, you're not amplifying enough points, because you get points for each tile that you buy, and then more points if you use the tile once or fulfill that contract. So it's maybe arguable that Obsession is or isn't a contract fulfillment game, but I feel like it's pretty close. In Obsession, you also have the secret goal, which I'll come back to. Another contract fulfillment game I really like, and I've talked about a fair amount here on the podcast, is the Kings of Air and Steam, which is a straight up pick 'em deliver game where you're trying to fulfill contracts. Next up is what I'm calling Pushmi-Pullyu. My least favorite thing about Lords of Waterdeep is there are a few cards you can play that interfere with other players kind of aggressively. And if you play them at the right time, they can be really game ruining, which is part of why I don't like that aspect of the game. But if I'm in the mood for that, or I'm playing with people and we've all kind of agreed, yeah, it's going to be a knife fight in the phone booth, then the game that reminds me the most of that is Nanti-Narking. In Nanti-Narking, you're getting these cards and you're using them to just do wild stuff to each other. The reason I picked that one over many other games where you're doing wild stuff to each other is it's card-based. It's based on the cards you draw, much like the Intrigue cards in Lords of Waterdeep. But also, more importantly, some of the cards in Nanti-Narking help other people. So you have to pick who to help with your cards, not just who to hurt. And or you have to, sometimes what you're doing is not hurting a person so much as rearranging their board or something. So those two things kind of together make Nanti-Narking feel more like the kind of push-me-pull-you effects in Lords of Waterdeep, and I like that a lot. The other game that I would put in the category of Arc Nova, or of Lords of Waterdeep, I gave it away, is Arc Nova. Arc Nova is a tableau builder with card draw and some tile placement, but the element of hurting the other players occasionally is there. If you choose to play with the attack cards, then there are some cards that come out that allow you to play nasty to other players, and if you play them at the right time, they can really disrupt what the other player is trying to do. So that's actually a very close fit to what's going on in Lords of Waterdeep with the Intrigue cards. All right, and then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the secret goal. The first thing you do in Lords of Waterdeep is you get your identity card showing which lord you are, and that lord gives you a bonus every time you complete one of the quests of a certain type. So you might get a bonus every time you complete a Skullduggery quest or Cleric quest, or sometimes you get a bonus points for every building you build. Like there's like 9 different lords, and you're gonna have one of them, and that goal is secret. And I like the games that have a secret goal that you reveal. Sagrada is one of my favorites. In that one, you have a color that you're trying to go for, but if you go to it too aggressively, other players might notice and might start stealing those ones out from under you. And I think Sagrada is tight enough that nobody's doing that. I think you focus on your own board, not other people's, but maybe. The other one that has those reveals is Ticket to Ride. In Ticket to Ride, you have these paths you're going for, and other people don't know exactly which paths you're going for, but there's a lot of different ways that you can try to complete those, and at the end of the game, you score points for the paths you've completed. So that's another example of secret goals. Now, Obsession has secret goals in it as well, as does Nanti-Narking. Nanti-Narking, you have a secret identity, you have a thing you're trying to do. So both of those games you could call sort of double whammy with Lords of Waterdeep. So what do you think about Lords of Waterdeep? Do you like it? Let me know by heading over to BoardGameGeekGuild3269 and sharing your experience there. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye. Hi. Thank you. You are? Come on. You get your right. All right.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.